21st of July. And the Ukrainian armed forces are bombing both St. Petersburg and Moscow. Fuck, I'm out of here. Damn. Unbelievable. Cars are on fire. This is fucked up. Just look at this shit. Cars are burning. The car's totally and utterly fucked. At home, it's completely ruined. Muscovites are crying. Very loud sound. For the first time, Moscow apartments have been trashed thanks to Russian rap. This is already panic, a total clinic. They were shot down above us. I filmed it. Russian rap is hitting the residential apartments of Muscovites. They haven't reached yet. The occupiers and rashes got scared. Here comes the boomerang. Yeah, shit. Shoot it down, damn it. Damn, did we get it? Yeah. So, what now? There. Muscovites are crying. The center of Moscow is currently exploding. Shot it down. Shot it down. Yeah, got it. Breaking news, friends, the 20th of July. And that was a hunt. Truly unbelievable. Cars are burning. More than 100 drones fiercely attacked Moscow and Russia last night. This is fucked up. Just look at this shit. The car is totally fucked. Whose is this? There, few broke through the air defenses and paralyzed Moscow and the Moscow region. Zelninograd, Solnechny Gorod, Dmitrov, Sergev Posadolin explosions. Domodedovo, Vnukovo and Zhukovsky airports have been shut down. The traditional carpet plan was activated. Nearly 1,000 flights have been cancelled. The Russians are in a panic. They are fighting, arguing and calling the police. They've been stuck at the airport for days without communication, internet, food or hotel. This plane landed yesterday evening. I've been trying to communicate and make calls for the whole day. It's not working. It's just not working out. Neither the airport nor anyone else is talking, no one. It's not working! With this kind of information, we can't exchange our tickets. I've lost my Istanbul-Venice tickets, 3 tickets. Now they're asking me to pay an extra $980 for each ticket. What a pity, poor thing. It's the same thing. What's going on here? That's a Russian woman. What's happening is a boomerang effect and retribution. On the ground, there are destroyed military facilities, houses, damaged factories, and munitions in Zerjinsk. The Ukrainian armed forces have delivered one of the most powerful strikes against Russian military command. Details about the elimination of General Lutyi from the headquarters of the 155th Brigade are in this episode. Meanwhile, Trump and Zelensky are negotiating a mega deal. The US is buying Ukrainian drones, and Kiev is getting weapons to strike Moscow and St. Petersburg. Moreover, Donald Trump claims that the armed forces of Ukraine should go on the offensive, and America will help them do it, while all of Russia trembles from explosions right outside the capital. Let's discuss all this with renowned military analyst Roman Svitin right now. Welcome! Wishing everyone good health! Roman Grigorievich. Last night the Ukrainian armed forces showed that Moscow is not a fortress. There were strikes. More than 100 drones disappeared and paralyzed the Russian capital. What do you think? Muscovites, don't sleep, as they say. Well, the carpet command isn't given at airfields for nothing. That means Muscovites would realistically need to go to their local supermarkets, purchase incredibly magical flying carpets, and then gracefully fly on those very same carpets all the way to a distant Bali, or perhaps some other equally exotic Bali. That's essentially the rather unusual kind of mechanism Rosaviatia is now seriously suggesting for all future air travel. A flying carpet. There won't be any other option anymore. As long as the fighting continues, as long as we are restoring our territorial integrity, as long as we are regaining our sovereignty, things in Russia will keep getting deeper and deeper, further and further. Some people, of course, like that. It's really a matter of perception here. So there will be fierce beavers, and those fierce beavers will keep flying further across Russia. We'll be able to reach as far as the Urals, that's for sure. We already have the means to deliver aerial bombs for about 2,500 kilometers. So there's still a lot of interesting things ahead, at least in the European part of Russian territory. So the actions of our special services, our defense forces, were correct. They were working specifically with a large number of drones. We've talked about this several times with you. If you send 3 or 4 drones every day, well, after all, the Russians do have some air defense, even though the territory is vast, but still, especially on the front line, it's already quite dense. It's hard to break through. They shoot down almost all of them. But when more than 100 drones come through, like this time, naturally, when they're heading, say, toward Moscow or the Moscow region, drones won't break through to Moscow. They won't break through to Moscow. That's something we need to understand clearly. But in the Moscow region, of course, they'll cause a stir. Just like this time. We've already suggested that Muscovites and Sobyanin chip in for a net, so he can catch our drones with it. Well, perhaps you could give him a truly serious and substantial net as a thoughtful gift, so he can effectively jump up and skillfully catch them. The primary and most crucial thing is to jump sufficiently high enough. That's the main and most effective method for intercepting our fierce and formidable ones and ours.
Roman Grigorievich, now for the hard facts, strikes on Moscow and the Moscow region, Zerjinsk, Oryol, Bryansk, and other regions. There were explosions in Solnekhnogorsk, Sergiv Posad, Dmitrov, Zelenograd, Kubinka, and Zvenigorod. So military facilities and an ammunition plant were attacked nearby. The Nizhny Novgorod airport was closed, and there was an attack in Zerjinsk. 3 airports, Domodedovo, Zhukovsky, and Vnukovo, were paralyzed. The cover plan was put into effect. So what was the purpose of this massive attack? What was the goal of this massive attack? Moscow, military factories, infrastructure. How do you assess this?
Well, at the very least, several military facilities like the airfield in Kubinka, which is very important for us. The thing is, this is a Moscow region, so-called court airfield, where a fairly large number of vehicles, including military equipment, are stationed. So it's very important for us. And by the way, there are anti-aircraft missile systems stationed there. In order to reach Moscow, you have to take out the air defense systems, specifically those in Kubinka. So, by the way, this could be one of the mechanisms for preparing our missile strike on Moscow. One of the options, at least, if, let's say, we finally get, because we've been waiting so long, ballistic missiles for Moscow, cruise missiles, our Neptunes. These aren't the long-awaited ATCMS, but we do have the Neptune. Yes, its original range was actually only 150 kilometers, the KH-35, which the Neptune is basically based on. And then the range increased to 300, 400 kilometers. There's 100 kilometers left, and it's 500 to Moscow. So essentially, our coastal missile system could even strike Moscow. We keep talking about the Crimean Bridge. The Crimean Bridge, but actually the Crimean Bridge is in Moscow. In Crimea, it's the Kerch Bridge, but the real Crimean Bridge is in Moscow. And sometimes, for example, we are not even wrong when we say we're preparing strikes on the Crimean Bridge. So Muscovites should be ready to understand this clearly. And so, for example, the strikes on Kubinka and the other airfields that happened that night are exactly the kind of preparation needed to gain air superiority for the advance of more powerful targets. I'll say it again, drones won't break through to Moscow. We all understand this perfectly well. The density is high, but the missiles and cruise missiles, some of them might get through, like the Neptunes, and then there's ballistics. We're waiting for ballistics. They say good things come to those who wait. Well, it's already the 3rd year, so it's about time.
Dear viewers, please like this video. Roman Grigorievich and I work 3 times a week on my YouTube channel, so every like, comment, and subscription from you is invaluable. Please write a few kind words to our duo in the comments. Roman Grigorievich, first of all, we see that the strikes are very close to the capital. Why is Russian air defense not coping right now? By the way, Russian war correspondents are writing about this, and they're angry.
We need to approach this objective. There are simply things that are impossible to do by definition. Well, Russia is 17 million square about 17 million square kilometers. It's just not realistically possible to cover such a vast territory. In order to cover the whole territory, they'd have to manufacture anti-aircraft missile systems for 1,000 years. And by then, the first ones produced would have already rotted, and even then, they still wouldn't be able to cover all of Russia. There are certain priority directions that the Russians are currently trying to secure. Their air defense system, in principle, is deployed, quite competent. That is, it's well positioned. There is a frontal air defense, which is already quite dense. It's very difficult to break through, but we've learned how to do it, especially with the use of a large number of decoy drones. So decoy drones going first, drawing the attention of the air defense. and causing them to fire their missiles. At that moment, the strike drones make their way through, and then they encounter the point air defense system. That is, point air defense systems are located, for example, in the vicinity of large population centers like Moscow, and perhaps some other sites are also protected. The Kerch Bridge, for instance, is also covered by serious multi-layer point air defense, just like Moscow. But Moscow itself is sealed off, no question about it. But the Moscow region, that is Moscow and the Moscow glass, they simply can't cover it all. Why is that? Because, well, there simply aren't enough air defense systems or aircraft for that matter. And also, first of all, Moscow and the Moscow region are practically packed with civilian airports. So you can't really fly helicopters or fighter jets around freely there either. There's a certain trade-off here. Either civilian aviation operates or military aviation does. So since they want both things at once, well, it just doesn't work. You can't have your cake and eat it too, and they can't pull it off. And that's why they're facing a big problem right now. We are able to break through the air defenses, at least the regional Russian ones around Moscow and the Moscow region, we can break through them. That's what we're seeing now. We're getting through. Yes, we really are reaching the main Moscow air defense system. Some of our drones do get shot down there, but those that, for example, head toward Kubinka or the factories in the Moscow region, they get through and complete their combat missions. There's nothing they can do about it. There simply isn't a mechanism. In order to say cover the entire Moscow region, the way they do Moscow itself, they'd have to gather all the anti-aircraft missile systems from across Russia, including, of course, from the occupied territories of Ukraine, and concentrate them to defend the Moscow region. But that's just not realistic. So it's unlikely that this will be done. So residents of the Moscow suburbs will soon be seeing more and more of our drones or debris. I've said so many times already we should name one of our drones, not Fierce Beaver, but debris. Like, they cover the Moscow region with debris. That's about how it is.
As for Zerjinsk, there was a strike on a munitions factory there, and the Nizhny Novgorod airport nearby is closed. So what do strikes on Zerjinsk mean? Are we signaling that we will attack ammunition depots or munitions factories in Russia?
Well, no, these aren't signals anymore. This is actual combat work. Moreover, it's planned, systematic combat work, which at this point still doesn't bring us much, doesn't give us a high efficiency yet. Why? There aren't enough drones. Well, either we have to direct everything we have at a single target, more than 100 at one spot. But if we spread them out like we're doing now, then we'll just be pecking away little by little here and there. You know, as they say, the hen covers the whole field, grain by grain, so to speak, gently put. Everyone understands this perfectly well. That's why I think the number of our drones targeting a single objective will simply increase, at least focusing on one target and inflicting certain specific damage. It's just that a drone can't do everything, especially when it comes to military targets. Drones are well used, for example, against airfields. Why is Kubinka interesting? At the airfield, there is airfield technical equipment, fuel and lubricant depots, naturally aircraft plus some systems or radars used by Russia's radio technical troops. Of course, these can be taken out, including by drones. Where else can drones be used? Russian oil refineries, those catch fire on their own. Oil refineries and Crimea. It's convenient for drones to approach Crimea from the sea because, well, the Russians don't have a mechanism to intercept over the sea. And the aircraft, both helicopters and planes, which they've recently used to intercept our drones, are easily shot down by the surface-to-air missile systems that the GUR has installed on the back of the Magura. And they've already taken out several aircraft, both helicopters and Su-30. That's why drones should be used there at least until missiles become available. But of course, when it comes to a military factory, the optimal choice is definitely to use missiles. Why? Because the warhead of a drone is around 50 kilograms, give or take 20, while a missile's warhead is half a ton. So for a military factory, especially to break through underground levels, it's definitely best to use that kind of warhead. We're waiting for the missiles. They've already been announced so many times. I mean, I think with all these announcements, with how many tickets have been bought for this show, people have already eaten all the popcorn they stocked up on to watch Moscow burn from our ballistic missiles, from our rockets. It's about time. It's time for this theatrical government to at least show the beginning of the performance.
Roman Grigorievich, regarding Kubinka, you said that most likely there was an attack on the military airfield. So does that mean we can assume that there was damage by Ukrainian Lutyi drones?
Well, absolutely. At the airfield, this is why drones are convenient to use, for example, against airfields and oil refineries. Oil facilities catch fire easily. You could set anything ablaze there with just a match, not to mention a 50-kilogram warhead. And at the airfield, all the technical ground equipment is exposed. It's all outside. You can't cover it up. Most of the planes are also parked out in the open. There are some revetments, but not all the planes are moved into them. Some maintenance is done during flights, but the planes are still brought out to the parking area or the runway. Plus, there are some systems and definitely radars too, again, all ground-based equipment. So a drone can definitely inflict damage there 100% if it gets through weather to the first, the second, or the third target. Naturally, Kubinka, there are definitely radars stationed in Kubinka, that's 100%, and some systems are there as well, 100%. Moreover, those some systems and radars also cover Moscow from the direction of Kubinka. So in this regard, of course, approaching Kubinka is a priority for us. Well, Kubinka is one of the airfields that the Russians use to protect Moscow itself. Moreover, right now they are violating, so to speak, this is a military crime. On one hand, they are placing military assets at civilian airfields, an operational civilian airfield, and right next to it, military assets are also operating some systems, radars, and even air. So this is already a problem for them, because if we strike military targets, they might end up shooting down a civilian plane as well. Moreover, they could do it themselves. This is called friendly fire, and it's happened more than once already.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Roman Grigorievich, you are a military expert after all, and that's important. Can strategic or tactical aviation be stationed at this military airfield?
No, only tactical aviation, of course. At Kubinka, it's tactical aviation. There's the so-called court regiment station there. In fact, all these Russian aerobatic teams, the Strigi and others, are mainly based at Kubinka. There are several aerobatic teams there, MiG-29S, and a few other aircraft as well. So they're there too. But these are military aircraft, so they should be considered legitimate targets.
I would also like us to focus on this today. Many people have talked about this. For example, Yuri Butusov wrote a lengthy piece about it. He recalled an important strike. In the past few weeks, the Ukrainian armed forces have delivered one of the most powerful blows to Russian military command, namely the destruction of the Russian headquarters in the Kursk region, and the details of the elimination of General Gudkov from the headquarters of the 155th Brigade. He wrote a lengthy article in which he explained just how historically significant this event is. In other words, the entire command staff of the Kursk region was wiped off the face of the earth, and this will be studied in NATO textbooks. Roman Grigorievich, could you please comment on this operation that took place a few weeks ago?
Well, I wouldn't say they were wiped off the face of the earth, more like buried in it. Yes, and in fact, our missile forces and our air force did a pretty good job targeting that particular command post. So, why do the Russians have this problem in the Kursk direction? Even now, the direction toward Moscow is full of extremely frightened idiots. They still haven't built any serious defensive lines there practically anywhere. Not in Bryansk region, not in Kursk, not in Belgorod. They tried to hint at creating, a buffer zone after Putin apparently remembered Kabaeva had probably associates these zones with her. So even after the creation of the so-called buffer zone, after the task was set, they still haven't actually built any real defensive lines anywhere. In other words, the route to Moscow was wide open, so to speak, open and direct, and it remains that way. They only covered the Moscow direction with air defense, nothing more, but everything that's happening with the Russians, especially in the Kursk region, these are, on the one hand, raid-type operations, and on the other hand, you could call them airborne operations. Why is it that all the paratroopers and all the naval infantry are concentrated there? It's to carry out a specific task, mainly related to some offensive operations, not defensive ones. That is the 810th Marine Brigade from Crimea is there. The 155th Marine Brigade from Vladivostok was also there. at least until it was decimated by strikes. I think the 217th Division from Ivanovo joked so much about it, the City of Brides, that now it's time to actually start an LGBT community in Ivanovo, because the Russian paratroopers from Ivanovo are currently on the Kursk front. And again, they're not trying to defend, they're trying to go on the offensive somewhere. Naturally, to launch an offensive, you have to move up to the front line. Headquarters, command systems, communication systems, equipment, ammunition, certain mechanisms for repairing equipment, they're all positioned right along the border, along the front line. And we have very good intelligence, especially in this direction. Our intelligence is working almost in real time. Moreover, there is direct coordination with the missile forces and aviation as well. In this direction, our aviation has now started to operate very intensively, especially towards the Kursk area. These include our MiGs, their MiG-29S, Su-27S, and even Mirages and F-16S are coming in there. In other words, they're giving it to all those Russian paratroopers left and right, the ones who have been ordered to defend by attacking. Of course, the best defense is offense, but when it constantly needs to be reinforced, the Russians have no reserves to reinforce with, they simply get worn down. Naturally, command posts located close to the front line come under our strikes. Rockets and HIMARS, well, that's a rocket bomb, so to speak. We have several JDAMs of different types from our 39th Aviation Corps. In addition to that, the latest batches, especially the 30th series of HIMARS rockets, with a range of 86 kilometers, can reach as far as Rilsk, Legov, and Korenovo, basically hitting those areas, not to mention Tetkino. As a result, naturally, the Russian command post of the 155th Brigade got caught up in this, and our serious aviation and missile weaponry hit there. They didn't wipe them out, but mixed them up, drove them into the Kursk soil, into our planet, so to speak. To this day, they still can't figure out whose hand is whose leg is whose.
Zelensky and Trump are discussing a mega deal. The US is buying Ukrainian drones that have been battle tested, and Ukraine gets access to American weaponry. Source, the New York Post. What do you think, are these real negotiations, or is this just part of Trump's political rhetoric? And which drones are the US interested in? The fierce ones, the beavers. Could such a mega deal between the US and Ukraine quickly strengthen the arsenal of the Ukrainian armed forces?
No, well, the beaver, believe me, the Americans already have quite a large lineup, a whole bench of reserves when it comes to operational and strategic level drones. Right now, the US is interested in our interceptor drones, which have proven themselves very well and are effective against other drones. Moreover, it's about the interception mechanism, the detection mechanism, the interception process itself, tracking and control. So it's an entire process. It's not just the drone itself, but the whole control process that's very important. That's one thing. Second, we currently have some solid developments in FPV drones, especially those related to artificial intelligence and machine vision. So this is an entire process that we've been working on for 4 years now, while the Americans are only just starting to look at it. They've especially realized the need for so-called counter-drone systems. After the Iranians sent hundreds of these drones at Israel and the United States, that is at their bases in the Middle East. So they realized that it's not so simple to fight against these drones. Obviously, it's a pity to use anti-aircraft missile system rockets for this, but counter-drone systems are extremely important, and the Americans will definitely be buying or exchanging them from us. For us, first of all, America is still our partner. We need to share with them definitely and share mechanisms for destroying the enemy, countermeasures, and some know-how. Well, naturally, we should get something in return for this. Since they are our partner, it means we should also be their partner. So they should share with us what we need most right now. That is what's important for us now, is the supply of American equipment and consumables for the systems that have already been delivered to us. For the F-16S, we need AIM-9S, AIM-7S, and AIM-120S. The AIM-120 missile is needed for NASAMS as well. It's used both in the F-16S and in NASAMS. We definitely need missiles for the Patriot system, PAC-2 and PAC-3. Naturally, other equipment as well, ranging from artillery to missile systems, plus support for the F-16S. So the Americans have helped us with a lot over the past 3 years, actually, more than 3 years. And we would like this cooperation to continue. We can offer some know-how in conducting combat operations, and that's exactly what interested the Americans. So it's this kind of exchange. And for Trump, well, he's a dealer. He always wants to bargain for something, to trade something somewhere. It's like a big marketplace. Right now, the White House is like a huge marketplace run by Trump and his administration. At this marketplace, you can negotiate for yourself. That's what our leadership is doing now.
Trump told Zelensky that Ukraine needs to go on the offensive, reports the Washington Post, citing a Ukrainian official. They write that the US president said this on the 4th of July during their phone conversation. At that time, Trump allegedly stated that Ukraine would not change the course of the war by playing defense. Media also report that after Zelensky's conversation with Trump on the 4th of July, Ukraine intensified its air attacks on Moscow.
He's right. Well, there's nothing new here. Of course, you can't win any battle by staying on the defensive unless the goal is simply to maintain territorial integrity. So in that sense, it's very important. Yes, one of the options is, for example, destroying the enemy, but if they all gather in one place and you can crush them there, then your own territories will be liberated automatically. But that's unlikely to happen. That's why we definitely need to move to offensive operations, but we need to understand that offensive operations can be of different types: ground, air, surface, and underwater. In other words, any offensive operation should be based on the available amount of forces and resources that can be allocated for that operation. Right now, we do not have enough forces and resources to conduct ground offensive operations. We need to be very clear about that. As for defensive weapons, for example, we are being supplied with them, but in terms of offensive quantities, definitely not. Deliveries would need to be increased 3, 4, even 5 times. And right now, there's simply nowhere to get them from. Secondly, we barely have enough personnel to cover our defense as it is. A decision to deploy law enforcement forces has still not been made. But if we were to deploy, say, a force of 100,000 law enforcement personnel, then we could also start planning ground offensive operations. But there still remains the possibility of conducting offensive operations using the air component aviation, missiles of various types, and a sufficient number of drones. Here, the main thing is quantity. 1, 2, or even 10 missiles won't accomplish any offensive operation. There should be at least 100 missiles. And as for drones, their numbers should be in the thousands. Only then would it be possible to carry out offensive operations, for example, to liberate Crimea, using long-range strike capabilities without a ground operation, the aviation component, the missile component, the BECs. We also have underwater drones. In other words, they are already carrying out combat missions. Among them, the Toloka drones have performed quite well. So if Trump is just changing his rhetoric, yes, his tone is shifting and he's trying to scare Putin, but for now, it's just rhetoric. It's like trying to scare a hedgehog with your bare backside. In other words, Putin doesn't react to this rhetoric. He only responds to actions. Basically, he needs to get a good kick in the face. And then maybe some sensible thought will finally form in his head that it's time to back off. So until we have, let's say, a sufficient amount of strike assets or power, the aviation component, the missile component, we can only talk about the need to conduct offensive operations. Of course, yes, we understand this perfectly well ourselves. If Trump moves from rhetoric to real action, and starts, for example, providing funding, that's another matter, whether it's European or ours, and begins to supply the weapons we've been asking for so long, like the JAS missiles, which we've requested so many times. There is a large number of JAS missiles, thousands of them have been produced. These are cruise missiles, air-launched missiles, which can be used by our F-16, SAUR, F-16S already. We already have a brigade with several dozen aircraft. If these missiles are supplied in sufficient quantity, they will make a real splash at depths of 500 kilometers and beyond in the enemy's rear, not to mention, for example, Crimea and the liberation of Crimea. If we receive ATACMS missiles in sufficient quantity, not just dozens, but hundreds, with ranges from 160 to 300 kilometers, we could effectively neutralize all military targets in Crimea, and that would already be 50% of the combat mission to liberate it. This is an offensive operation. So it would be good if Trump moved from words to action. This opportunity will only arise when he changes his team. Well, as long as he has the current team, they're focused on the Middle East. They won't address European issues or broader democratic matters at all. If Trump replaces his current team, gets rid of all this riffraff, for example, and brings back his first team, his original group, brings Bolton back, say, or even Pompeo, especially Pompeo, then we could say that this whole White House team might actually move from words to action. Remember last year, Pompeo actually outlined a specific plan to allocate us $500 billion worth of equipment under Lend-Lease to be paid for in a few decades from Russian reparations. So this kind of approach would certainly give us opportunities for offensive operations. We'll see. It's still not out of the question.
Roman Grigorievich, according to CNN, 160,000 Russian troops are concentrated and ready to advance. That's the figure CNN is reporting. So the offensive could begin the second wave we've been talking about in the coming weeks. And the main question here is, where will the strike be prepared? Kharkiv region, Donbass, Zaporizhia region. How realistic are these offensive plans? Is it really 160,000? Or is this disinformation meant to distract? And given the current losses in command, is the Russian army ready for a large-scale operation?
Well, these resources have been prepared since the new year. That's why we've been talking about this for several months. The first wave, the second wave, these are certain periods of offensive operations. Let's say there's this summer military campaign with the first wave mainly focused on probing the front and carrying out so-called shaping operations, which are mostly reconnaissance in force, as it's called. And that's what's been going on for the second month now. And the second wave is the wave of reserves, which sometimes even starts to be prepared after the first wave has begun. That is, the main reserves, for example, are prepared after the start of the first wave. They are positioned at depths of about 100 kilometers. Well, in reality, they are always prepared from a depth of about 50 kilometers, the so-called army depth. Since we now have a large number of HIMARS, dozens of launchers, and a significant number of HIMARS rockets with a range of 80 kilometers, the Russians have moved not to the 50-kilometer zone, not to the army depth, but have pulled back to the frontal depth, the 100-kilometer zone. That is the main Russian reserves deployed in the area of Mariupol, Berdyansk, Melitopol. If we look at the south and Luhansk, meaning in terms of distance, beyond Donetsk, in the Kharkiv area, beyond Makivka, further east. So now, at this moment, they are starting to move them closer. The total number of reserves is somewhere over 100,000, maybe not quite the 160,000 that some sources are reporting, but they really do have over 100,000 and they are already on the move. The point is, there is already information that all these reserves are starting to move closer to the line of contact. In other words, the equipment has started moving. The equipment is running on a large amount of fuel, which was supplied to the Russians by our authorities without the sanction of Maliuk or Budanov, by not destroying Russian oil refineries. So we can say with confidence that this equipment will definitely keep moving. And the second wave of the Russian offensive operation was also made possible in part by our own authorities, by not allowing the destruction of the Russian oil industry. And all these resources in the near future, within a week or two, reach the front line and start moving. Where is it headed? To the Zaporizhia front and the Eastern front. So it's clear where they're moving. Mainly, if we're talking about the Zaporizhia front, it's the area around Orikiv. That is, movement has already started from Tokmak, at least through Kamishzaria, through Polohi towards Huliaipol. That's the Zaporizhia direction, plus the Eastern front. The Donetsk front, if you look at it, starting from the south, from Novoselka, ending, if we talk about the Donetsk front, almost up to Kostiantynivka, and now almost up to Siversk, plus there is movement, including in the Kharkiv-Luhansk direction along the Kupiansk-Lyman axis. There's movement starting there as well. So you could say that the second wave is already being prepared, and in a few days or weeks, we'll see it. This is basically what all the tabloids are writing about right now. In other words, this is general information. It's not some kind of insider scoop. This is everything that's basically being planned before the summer military campaign even begins. Therefore, the main movement of Russian reserves will be in two directions, the Zaporizhia and Eastern fronts. That is, the Donetsk and Zaporizhia directions aimed at expanding the land corridor. This is a military objective. It's very important for them to expand it. And it also serves the political goal of capturing those regions that the Russians have written into their constitution. Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, Kherson, and Crimea. Since they're unlikely to go to the right bank as they don't have enough forces or resources for that. So the main pressure will be on the Zaporizhzhia and Donetsk regions. They have practically already captured Luhansk.
Dear audience, please like this video. Roman Grigorievich and I work on my YouTube channel Dasha Slivaya 3 times a week, so every like, comment and subscription from you is invaluable. Let us know where you're watching from, share your location in the comments. Roman Grigorievich, a well-known military leader. Thank you very much, and as usual, see you on Monday.
Goodbye.